Welcome to the Good Growing Podcast. I am Chris Enroth, horticulture educator with University of Illinois Extension, coming at you from Macomb, Illinois, and we have got a great show for you today. I.P.M. sounds like a setup to a joke, but I promise it is going to be gardening related today. We're going to go into I.P.M. and we'll talk about what that all means. But you know I'm not doing this by myself. I am joined, as always, every single week by horticulture educator Ken Johnson in Jacksonville. Hey, Ken.
Hello, Chris. Do you practice I.P.M. in your garden?
Yes, I practice all kinds of I.P.M. Safe I.P.M. That's me, yeah. I'm a good I.P.M.er.
Good.
People are like, some people probably know what we're talking about, right? But some others are like, oh my gosh, what are they doing right now? Yeah. All right. Promise, just stick with us for a little bit, folks.
So before we get into telling people what I.P.M. actually is, if they don't know. So you did send me an article last week that we should probably talk about lightning in a particular species of trees in South America and how it's beneficial.
Yes, in the tropics of South America. The specific tree was Diptrix olifera. And it is a particular tree that grows in the rainforest in South America. And it's one of those that it's like in a movie, it's one of those late blooming stories, the child, he's sick all the time and he just struggles to survive. But then once they get into adulthood, they're like strong and they're tough. So that is this particular species of tree, in that not as many of these younger trees survive to adulthood to become these massive rainforest trees. But when they do, they are super tough, so tough that they, just observers, I think at first, and now looking more scientifically at it, are seeing that they are surviving lightning strikes. And which is interesting because trees, if you're the biggest, tallest tree with the largest or widest crown or canopy, you've now become primary target for lightning strikes. This is a case where, yes, lightning does in fact strike here more than once. They're just kind of more of that, that beacon or that lightning rod for lightning strikes, and so they're that bigger target. But these particular trees, they seem to survive more often than not lightning strikes, which wind up killing all of the smaller competitive trees around them, and even a lot of those tropical vines that grow on the branches of these trees that get struck by lightning. And so it sheds off all these vines, it reduces competition around it, and they see kind of a jolt of growth in these trees from this lightning strike. So pretty fascinating idea here that there's potential evolutionary pathway here for lightning survivorship.
So lightning isn't all bad.
If you are this particular tree.
There's the exception to the rule we always talk about.
That's true. Yes. And they don't really know why. There's theories, but, basically like, there's, different species of trees have different types of woody fibers, different physiological traits within them. Their vessel structures might be a little different. Maybe they hold a little bit more water in certain parts of their trees or their cells. They might have different like metal ions, like concentrations of them throughout their tissue. And so all of that, these are just theories. They don't really know why these trees are able to have a low resistance to lightning, which just allows the lightning to sort of pass right through them into all of the surrounding trees. A very interesting article. It was sent to us by a viewer of the podcast. So yeah, thanks for sending that. It was a very, very good read. So I enjoyed it, and I grew up on a hill out in the middle of the country, and so we had lots of lightning strikes. around the house, on the house, of the trees. Yeah. So we lost a lot of trees to lightning when growing up.
Sounds like you need a cold hardy version of this one. Start that breeding program.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those with the big, wide buttresses, these big tropical trees that just like they flare out into this, I don't know, just this humongous thing at the base. So, yeah, I'll probably dive more into this topic later, just doing some reading and just because I find this interesting. So, but we can share the article down below in the show notes. Oh, Ken, what are we talking about today? What is IPM?
IPM is Integrated Pest Management. So basically, we're using multiple, I guess, multiple different ways of managing pests in our landscapes instead of just using the all too popular spray and pray approach. So we see a pest, we reach for the pesticide, we spray it, hope for the best. We're using other strategies to manage these pests besides chemical.
Mm-hmm. I see. Okay. So we're taking a multi-pronged approach here to take care of a pest, but what are those pests? This seems pretty relative to folks, right? Like, my pest might not be your pest.
I think you just have to look at our lawns to figure that one out. So yeah. So basically, a pest is any organism, whether that's an insect, a plant, which we would call a weed, a pathogen, a mammal, a bird, what have you, that's seen as harmful, annoying, causing some sort of damage, whether that's to our plants, the environment in general, property, humans, what have you. So basically, it's an unwanted object. So we think about creeping Charlie. I think a majority of people would consider that a weed, regardless of where it's growing. I consider it a weed. My yard's still a good chunk of creeping Charlie, but it's not a big enough a pain for me to do anything about. But I would still consider that a weed. Japanese beetles. I have yet to meet somebody who wants Japanese beetles, even though they are beautiful insects. Again, they're feeding on ornamental plants. They're feeding on fruits. They're feeding on vegetables. So we consider that a pest. Diseases, I can't. Maybe like your tulip brake virus. Maybe that would be a desirable disease, but most people do not find diseases to be desirable in their plants, especially if it's a plant they want. Maybe if it's a weed and it's got a disease, you may be happy. But again, diseases, fungus, bacteria, virus, what have you, people would consider a pest.
I readily encourage fire blight and calorie pear. Just put that one out there.
The exception to the rule.
I take fire blight infected pears and throw them in other trees. No, I don't do that, folks. I don't. That'd be mean.
Only on my own property.
That's right. That's right. Don't do that to someone else.
But then we've got things like squirrels. So some people actively feed squirrels. Others, they don't want any squirrel around. So that's where we start kind of getting into that. Is that a pest? Is it or not? Birds. We'll have people feed birds, but when we have a drought and they're getting into your garden and eating your tomatoes or your peaches or anything like that, we consider them a pest. So I think there's some organisms out there that we would widely consider pests. Doesn't matter who it is. There's others. It's going to depend on the individuals whether they think it's a pest, and then it may be the situation too, where birds normally are fine, but when they start eating our crops, and they're pests. So it's a continuum. It's all shades of gray, not black and white like we like to make it a lot of times.
Mm-hmm. I had someone we were talking this morning. They were a master gardener, and they were saying how they were excited that the snakes were out. This was a particular person who likes snakes. They want snakes in their yard, and they caught the crows getting the garter snakes out of their yard. And the crows, I didn't know they did this behavior, but they will drown them or dunk them in the bird bath. Like, I don't know if they're drowning them or if they're cleaning them or what. I don't know what they're doing with the snake and why they're submerging in the water. But she was so upset because oh, my snakes, I wanted these snakes, and these crows come in and they just start eating them all. And so, yeah, it's darn crow birds. I do like birds, except for starlings. don't like starlings, European starlings. I see the starlings at the suet feeder, and that's when I unleash my hounds, my two little labs.
See, hopefully she didn't try to rescue the snake from the crows. I don't know if you want to make a bunch of crows angry at you.
No, you don't want to get a murder of crows angry at you. No, don't do that. But yeah, they were cleaning their. She watched it happen. She's like, because someone else was like, well, are you sure it wasn't a raccoon? Because raccoons do that too. She's like, nope. I watched him pick up the snake and put it in the bird bath. It was behavior they'd never seen before. So.
Yeah, snakes would be another example. I would be excited if I found a snake in my yard, but some people would be running for the shovel, and that'd be the end of that.
Come visit me, Ken, where the water snakes will chase you back into the house. Oh, okay. So pests vary. It's relative. And so we're going to utilize integrated pest management, or IPM, as a strategy to minimize damage to our plants and that we want to keep from being damaged. So how do we start the system? Like, all right, yeah, IPM, but what's the foundation here? Like where are we beginning?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, so IPM, it's again, this is comprehensive approach to managing pests, whether we're defining that as insects, weeds, pathogens, what have you. And in a lot of cases, we'll use insects, for example. We've got this population of insects. We're going to use these strategies, and typically we're not going to completely eliminate a pest in the case of insects or something like that, because we're trying to use kind of environmentally sound practices, economically sound practices. And if we want to completely eliminate something, a lot of times we're getting away from that, those environmentally, economically sound practices. So a lot of times we're getting populations down, especially for insects, to a level where they're not causing like considerable or really noticeable damage. So we're not losing a lot of yield on our crops. They're not, for ornamental plants, it's not causing, so much aesthetic damage that it's noticeable. There'll be some chewing here and there, but it's not detracting from the overall appearance of the plant. So typically not completely wiping something out if we're taking the IPM approach. And I think there's a lot of ways people talk about IPM. A lot of times they talk about them as a toolbox. So we've got our different tools in the toolbox to manage pests. When I was in school, the way I learned it was like as a structure. So basically any good structure, you've got a good foundation. You can have all the fancy pillars and all that, but foundation crumbles, it all falls apart. So kind of the foundation for IPM or pest management is, basically understanding what our plants are supposed to look like, the requirements that they need to grow. So is it, the sun exposure, we're planting full sun and shade, or vice versa, your plants are going to struggle. And they're going to be more prone to stuff. What's that plant supposed to look like? What is normal? And that can vary it's going to vary from species to species, cultivar to cultivar. A lot of times, nowadays with more and more cultivars, there's some weird looking stuff that doesn't look like the quote unquote normal plants. So knowing what it's supposed to look like. So if you see something abnormal, is that just the cultivar, or is that actually something that's causing the problem? If you've got, I think most people, if we're planting a garden, we're for the most part, we know what we're planting. Maybe if we're moving into a new house, we don't know what stuff is necessarily. But knowing what your plants are, familiarizing yourself with some of the common pests and diseases that show up. You're never going to know all of them. And we don't know all the pests that can attack grass just off the top of our head. All right, pick your plant. I mean, there's so much stuff out there, and there's some oddball stuff that you read about, but you'll never actually see, or stuff like that. But what commonly attacks it? So you know what that stuff looks like. In the case of diseases, what are those common symptoms? Where does it attack? Just kind of get a general familiarity of what potential problems are going to be, so that when you are out in your landscape looking at stuff, you can recognize that stuff. And the sooner you notice something going wrong, the sooner you can take action, the easier it is in a lot of cases to manage that problem if you catch it early. So that's, you can use all that information to go out and kind of inform your scouting when you go out and do that.
You said we're not doing spray and pray. We're diagnosing plant problems. We're going out and we're trying to figure out what is going on. And as happened multiple times, in my career here where I get the phone call after the fact, after whatever damage has happened or perceived damage has happened, and after the pesticide has been applied, then I get the phone call like, well, what was this? I sprayed it. I don't know what I was spraying for. Like, well, it's hard to tell after the fact. So, but we can rule some things out. But really, I think the key thing is, as you mentioned, Ken, is just being able to identify what is the difference between an environmental issue and a living or a biotic issue. So this is kind of like abiotic versus biotic. So something that would be a biotic issue would be like aphid damage causing curling on your leaves, or could be a particular leaf disease like anthracnose or mildew that causes curling on your leaves. Compare that to an environmental issue, which could be like frost damage, causes very similar looking curling, or potentially even like herbicide damage, which would be a human caused thing, environmental issue drifting onto your plants. So they all look very similar. And so I think it is being able to go out and sort of, as you mentioned, scoping out what's going on around your garden, around your landscape, looking for those patterns. And we're diagnosing stuff. We're not guessing. Well, kind of still do sometimes, but we
educated guesses.
And that's what we learned in science class. Yes, that's right. So we were making educated guesses. Yeah, and I would say from like the landscape industry, when we talk about the aesthetics of plants, people don't really notice when their plants are being damaged at first. There's a lot of insect feeding that can go on. There's a lot of disease issues that can manifest before we start noticing. We're not up in the canopy of our shade trees every day like we are when we're picking tomatoes or picking peppers or something, where we're like face to face with those plants. And so I think in that aesthetic world, our threshold for damage is much higher than if we were in the vegetable garden. And for some people, if you're looking at your turf grass, sometimes you can not have a blade out of place, and the alarm bells start ringing in their heads, and they start start trying to figure out what's going on. What else do I need to apply to fix my lawn? I find that there's a lot of people that are very sensitive about vegetables and lawns. And hydrangeas too. I get a lot of hyperhydrangea questions. So yeah, but basically the point I'm trying to make is that the aesthetic landscape, the ornamental landscape, usually our threshold for pests is higher.
Yes, and that even is going to vary on individuals. I'm willing to bet that my damage threshold on aesthetic plants is going to be much higher than many other people. It's going to take a lot for me to actually do something about something eating my ornamental plants. Basically, it's basically I have to risk like the plant dying before I'm going to do anything about it in a lot of cases.
And maybe that's their thought too. Like they see damage and they think this could cause this plant to die. Whereas, you and I, we're at least a little bit, hopefully we know a little bit more than the average person, but I won't make that claim in public, only to you, dear podcast folks. I would say we know that insects eat plants and that plants get sick, and it's usually not all the time, but a lot of times it'll be okay. The plant will recover. You can cut that particular disease off. There's things that you can do that won't kill that plant. So it's not a panicky moment for us, at least. I think that explains when I would walk into the kitchen, bleeding everywhere. And my mom, who was a nurse, would be like, "You're fine." I was panicking. She was pulsating. Not. Yeah.
Bone's not sticking out.
You're fine. Go back outside. Put a Band-Aid on. Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of times when we talk about pests, I think a lot of times when we talk about plants, we make them out to be these really delicate things that, one little thing goes wrong, it's game over. But plants are are pretty resilient, especially once they've become established in the landscape. They can, we're painting with a broad brush here, but they can handle a fair amount of damage before things start going south.
Well, good. Yeah. So we're laying our foundation down. Let's put some names to our foundation blocks here. So kind of at the core is the science of it all, is the taxonomy, knowing your plant, knowing also potentially your pest, the biology, how, and then the ecology. And so how all that interacts with each other, in those relationships. And then maybe on top of that, we have our scouting, which is us actively doing something out in the garden, not necessarily spraying anything, but we're just being observant. And then our thresholds, like, where do we draw the line? We're like, okay, I need to do something. I must intervene here. So we have our foundation laid, Ken. I think it's time to keep building up this structure, though. So you mentioned pillars. To what you learned about in terms of IPM as a college lad. What are these so-called pillars that you mentioned?
So our pillars, so our actual management techniques that they're kind of doing the lifting of our pest management program are going to be our cultural controls, our management strategies, our physical, our mechanical management strategies, our biological, and then chemical control strategies. So we're going to use these 4 different things in our landscapes to try to manage the pests. And go back to scouting real quick. When we're scouting, ideally we're going out in our landscapes once a week, and we're not, you have to do like a thorough, spend hours doing this, but just go out into your plants, look for anything that's not, air quotes, normal here. We would talk about insects. I'll have our smaller insects, aphids, mites, things like that. They like the new succulent growth. So looking at that, flipping over leaves, see if there's anything on the underside, but just go out once a week, however often you can, and just go out and look. You planted all the plants, you might as well go out and enjoy them. And while you're enjoying them, look for anything that may be, that may not look right. And if it doesn't look right, then you can focus in on that plant and investigate further. So if you see a problem, you need to actually look around a little bit more. See if it's just that plant, if it's other plants being affected, if it's only a particular part of the plant, where are these symptoms happening on the plant? So,
yes. So go out and enjoy your landscape, folks. It's an order.
Yes. It's getting nice out. No more excuses.
That's right. That's right.
Get a raincoat. Be all right. Just don't touch the plant so you don't spread disease.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you don't touch wet plants. That's the thing with vegetable gardens a lot, though. Like they're like, don't work in your vegetable garden after a rain when the leaves are wet because you could potentially spread disease that way. And if you work in a greenhouse, particularly if you're growing sensitive crops, you would have to like sanitize your hands. You have to sanitize your boots. Sometimes they make you put on like a Tyvek suit or something. They don't mess around with disease.
Can't smoke because you get TSV,
tobacco mosaic virus.
Yeah, they can survive through smoking and stuff. So,
yeah. Yep. So, we digressed, Ken, into disease controls in a greenhouse. But so yes, back to our pillars, though. Our first one, you had mentioned cultural management. I mean, I feel like I'm cultured. I drink middle-priced wines. I don't mind craft beers, but I'll also go into the beer fridge for some cheap stuff too. So I'm cultured. What else do I need for this one? Am I talking about the wrong thing here?
I may not be the person to ask. I'm not very cultured.
Oh, no.
So for cultural management, basically we're maintaining our plant health. So I think this is, these are all important, but I think this is the one where, if you do this one right, this can probably go the furthest in managing pests, because we're trying to maintain plant health. So just like with people, when we're stressed, we don't get enough sleep, we're more prone to get sick because our immune system, it kind of gets suppressed. Same thing with plants. When they're stressed, they're not growing well, they're more susceptible to attack from pathogens, insects, what have you. So, let's assume we're getting into the right plant at the right place at the right time. So, again, we're not putting full sun plants in shade and vice versa. The plants are going to struggle on that. Matching the plant needs with the proper the conditions that you have. So if you've got acidic soils, you can put blueberries, azaleas, stuff like that in the ground. If you don't have that, you're going to have to amend the soil or grow them in pots because they're going to struggle in soils that have pH that are too high, or vice versa. You get higher pH and pH is too low. The drainage. So if you need well-drained soils, you're not planting that in areas where water stands, or they need sandy soils. You're not doing that in a lot of our typical Illinois soils. It's got decent amount of clay content, stuff like that. Right time. It's spring right now, so we're recording this April 15th. We've had some 80 degrees, close to 80-degree days, 70-degree days. Hopefully, in vegetable gardens, you can put out your tomatoes and peppers yet, because we're still getting down into the 30s at night. And those plants are going to suffer, and good chance they're going to die. So proper planting time, is that proper fertility. So soil testing occasionally, and checking that pH, what the fertility levels are like. So if you are deficient in something, good chance the plant's going to tell you. You're going to have symptoms of that, but then you've got that soil test to back that up, and then you can amend or fertilize accordingly. Looking at resistant cultivars, and I think this is especially for, newer gardeners, and especially at food crops, looking at resistant cultivars. So typically we're doing this for diseases. So diseases will attack susceptible plants. So that, if the pathogens there, the conditions are right, the plants are going to get infected. When you have resistant, they still may get infected, but they're able to survive that. The effect isn't as great. You don't lose as much yield and stuff like that. So you're going to be more successful with those resistant. They can withstand that attack from those plants or from those pathogens. They may not get infected, or if you have, perfect conditions, they may get infected, but it's not going to be nearly as bad as susceptible. So looking at resistant cultivars for disease can help. I'm not going to say eliminate problems, but can really reduce the amount of problems you're going to have potentially by doing that. You can do stuff like pruning. We're talking about trees, pruning out crossing branches so they're not rubbing, opening up wounds so pathogens and insects can get easier, getting easier. Good sanitation, removing disease plant material so that inoculum isn't there, that's able to spread. Mulching. We talk about mulch a lot. We've got a whole podcast episode on mulch, but putting that down and helping retain that soil moisture. It can help, in the winter with that frost freeze cycle, help with prevent heaving of plants, especially with newly planted stuff. Water use. So we get into a drought, if there's no water restrictions, making sure you're watering stuff. And if we're getting plenty of water and you've got like an automatic irrigation system, turning that off, because too much water is going to cause just as many problems as not enough. Both ways we're killing the roots of the plants. One is just because they're not getting enough, and one's because they've got too much and they have no oxygen anymore and they die. So just some examples of ways we can do that. The cultural management, a lot of this is going to be kind of in a lot of cases before we even plant. Looking at this stuff.
Now I get it now. Good plant culture.
Yes.
I understand. So right plant, right place. Take care of it the way it needs to be taken care of. Gotcha, Ken. I see why I have so many problems in my own yard. I just thought I could throw my own cultural personalities at these landscape plants, and they would respect me.
Get a monocle for your plants. Just do much better.
My favorite thing for plants is putting monocles and googly eyes on them. Yes. How'd you know? All right. So we have good culture for our plants. And then the next pillar was talking about physical stuff, mechanical stuff. So this is obviously where I go and buy all my tools, right? And help me do what I need to do to have a good time in the landscape, play with all my toys outside. What are we talking about when we talk about mechanical control?
So if gadgets are your thing, yeah, mechanical, physical is the one for you.
Yes.
So this we're trying to physically eliminate or prevent pests from getting in. So cultivating the soil for weeds, things like tobacco, tomato, hornworm will overwinter in the soil. So you can cultivate the soil, try to destroy those pupa, prevent them from coming out in the spring. Again, pruning out diseased plant material, pruning out bagworms, webworms, things like that on trees. If you have really high populations, you don't want to hand pull them all. Hand picking is still probably better for the tree than just lopping off a branch, but you can still do it. Just hand pulling weeds or whatever gadgets you want to get for weed pulling. There's a lot out there for that. Barriers. So last year with the cicadas, if you put up netting over a newly planted tree or shrub, you were practicing I.P.M. there, trying to keep those, in the case of cicadas, off so they're not laying eggs. You see it a lot in like fruit bushes, raspberries, blueberries, sometimes putting netting over those plants so birds can't get to the fruit and eat them and stuff. So basically you're keeping them out of those plants so they can't get to them and take your harvest from you. And then your other mechanical devices, you name it, your flame weeders and all of that kind of stuff.
I was just going to ask you, where does fire fit into all of this?
I would say that'd be physical.
Is that mechanical?
Yeah, physical. Yeah.
Okay. It's not biological. Fire is alive. Like in the movie Backdraft. Okay. I like mechanical. I do a lot of mechanical, mostly with my hands. I don't have that many toys. I do have a cultivator, a couple different types of those. And when we cultivate to control things, you mentioned hornworm, but also like seedlings, weed seedlings, we're just kind of like scratching the soil surface. We're not digging. We're just taking these cultivators. I have a cleaner hoe. I have a wire weeder. I have a couple other items. We're just sort of scratching up that surface, dislodging those weed seedlings, which is way easier to do that than if you would let those weeds get away from you and then you have to bend over and like physically pull them out. So, just there are tools that are made to help you out. I often equate a lot of these garden tools as like kitchen gadgets. I feel like the world of like kitchen gadgets, like that whole economy, they have all these kind of weird things to help you, or not really. I guess it's to help you do simple tasks in the kitchen. I remember my wife, she got this one thing, and it's not the infomercial one. It's like the knockoff of the infomercial one, where you put your strawberry in there and you slap it and it chops it up. She didn't get the brand name. She got the knockoff one. But I feel like the gardening world has that stuff like that too. So you have to be careful. I think that there's some core tools out there that we probably talked about on the show multiple times before. But yeah, there's I do caution people sometimes, watch out for some of those gimmicky garden products. Just keep your eye out for those. There are certain things that I reach for more often than others.
Yeah, I'd say for collinear hoe, stirrup hoe. Mm-hmm. Those I do use for a lot of my weeding. But yeah, it's kind of ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. You get on that early, get them all their seedlings. It's going to save you a lot of time. You can spend an hour weeding in the spring, or you can spend 5 hours in the summer trying to hand pull all that stuff. So people are busy and stuff, but if you can get the time to get it while it's little, you're going to save yourself a lot more time down the road.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, the next pillar that we're going to be talking about with I.P.M. Notice, folks, we haven't even gotten to chemicals yet. Our next one is biological controls. Ken, this one sounds a little scary to me. Feels like there's a lot of horror movies that have been based upon some of these things that happen in the real world. Describe biological controls for me, and I'm going to hide.
Yeah, try to contain myself because make us go 2 hours here. So
This is your favorite part.
This is my
Yes.
favorite one.
Mm-hmm.
So with this, we're using natural enemies to manage our pests. So usually in home gardens, we're using insects or other related arthropods to control other insects. Now there are, if you want to talk about weed management, with invasive weeds, sometimes they'll bring in insects that will feed on those. But I guess for the purpose of our podcast today, we're just going to talk about insects, mites feeding on other insects, and mites for the most part. So we've got things like predators. So these are actively consuming. They're prey. A lot of times they're active. They're running around trying to catch stuff. So we've got, spider mites. So two-spot spider mites, common pest in our ornamental plants, not a lot of other plants. There are, I'd say people are probably familiar with pest mites, but there are also beneficial mites that are predatory. They'll go out and eat other mites, mite eggs, sometimes maybe really small insects or insect eggs that they'll feed on. So again, just because you see a mite doesn't mean it's actually going to be a pest. Typically, kind of general rule, our predatory mites are move much more quickly. They're actively moving around, whereas our plant feeding mites are a little slower, not in too big of a hurry a lot of times. And if you smear them, you smush them and smear them, usually the plant feeding ones are going to smear green, whereas the predatory ones are going to be more of a reddish, orangish color. So if you see a mite, again, it doesn't mean we're going to spray. We want to figure out if it's actually something that's going to warrant taking some kind of action against it. Ladybugs, lady beetles, whatever you want to call them, both the larvae and the adults will feed on small soft-bodied insects, so aphids. Some will feed on mealybugs, some will feed on scale. There's even some species that feed on powdery mildew. So we got a whole gamut of things that they'll feed on. And this is one we talk about actually identifying the problem. I don't know. I'm going to say this is my favorite one, probably my least favorite one question I give. But people come in, they've got some damage to their plants. They see these little insects running around. They spray and they bring them in, want to know what it was. Well, they were lady beetle larvae, and you just sprayed and killed all your lady beetle larvae. So again, because those larvae look nothing like the adults, so it's unless you know what you're looking at, it's not really intuitive. Oh yeah, that's a lady beetle larvae. So again, proper identification is going to be important. It's like lacewing larvae, kind of like alligator shaped. They'll feed on small, soft-bodied insects, and there's all kinds of different predatory insects out there. So again, just because you see an insect doesn't mean it's a pest. We got parasites, parasitoids. So we got parasitoid wasps are usually what we talk about. So these are small wasps, like the size of a gnat. We're not talking yellow jacket, bald-faced hornet size here. Small wasp lay their eggs inside of an insect. So aphids would be an example. Larvae will eat the inside of the aphid. It'll pupate inside, cut a hole, come out, kind of like movie Alien. They just burst out of there. If you have hornworms in your garden, your tomato plants, see all those little white things on there. Those are the cocoons of wasps that were inside that caterpillar eating it. They've burrowed out, spun a cocoon, and they'll go out and, when they emerge, the adults go out and attack other caterpillars and stuff. So if you see something like that, leave that in your landscape. That caterpillar's not eating anymore, and you're going to have potentially dozens of caterpillars or wasps coming out of that'll attack stuff. In the case of aphids, they'll become mummies. They'll kind of inflate a little bit, look kind of brown and papery. Those have all been attacked by parasitoid wasps. So again, even for these parasitoids, we see these pests, we want to look a little bit closer to make sure something's not already managing those. Syrphid fly larvae, predators, they look kind of like
a slug.
Slug-like, yeah. So again, so look closely if you've got some of these smaller pest insects to see if you've got any of these natural enemies there attacking them. And then we've got pathogens. So just like people and plants, insects have diseases that'll attack them as well.
I've heard like fungal infections of insects are responsible for like one of the reasons why we're not like up to our necks in insects. Like there's a lot of disease spread that happens in the insect world, fungal, bacterial, viral. Like we get sick with them, and so do insects. We're all animals here.
Yeah, I would say with that and other insects and things eating them, and I mean, nature does a pretty good job of keeping things under control. It's when when we get involved as people, we throw
Yeah.
everything out of whack and
Our
things
big brains.
things get out of balance.
So, could we bring in other insects to help us out? Get so many like emails and ads pop up like buy ladybugs for your garden. Is that a good idea?
So you can do it. I'd say a lot of times when you're buying them, you let them go and they just disperse everywhere. They don't really stay where you want them to stay. So I'd say a lot of times if you're buying stuff, especially if they're really mobile as adults, you're usually doing that. So you're gonna be more successful if you're doing that in a contained environment, greenhouse environment, something like that, because they can't escape from there. So yeah, you see ladybugs for sale a lot of times in garden catalogs, and a lot of times those are wild harvested, usually from California and stuff. So there are necessarily issues with that, but when they're basically hibernating and then you let them go and they're all discombobulated and stuff, and you see like praying mantids, the Ootheca for sale. I think praying mantids are cool. I like them and stuff, but I wouldn't spend the money on those personally. Usually they're selling the Chinese mantid, which is an introduced species. They can cause problems for native mantid populations, and they're generalists, so they're going to eat anything they can get their hands on. I guess their forelimbs on. So pest beneficial, what have you, and if there's not enough food, they will cannibalize each other. So you may have dozens of them coming out, but you may only end up with a couple. So they're not the most efficient predators in the landscape. If you find one in your landscape, leave it. But I wouldn't spend the money on bringing those in. I think what we really do for the biological control is kind of setting up our landscapes so that they are kind of inviting or welcoming to them, that conservation or manipulative biological control. So maintaining our habitats so that our habitats are suitable for their development. So we're helping to draw in the adults. The adults are there. The adults have food sources. A lot of them, of the adults, will feed on pollen and nectar as adults. Even things like lady beetles. Early in the year, when there's not a lot of other insects out that they're going to feed on, they can supplement their diet with pollen. And then when the pest populations come out, they're going to be there because they've got that alternate food sources to keep them around, and they can go out and attack other things. So, things with smaller flowery, a lot of these insects are small. They don't have very big mouth parts, so smaller flowers, carrot family plants. So if I get carrots in my garden that bolt, I just leave them, let them flower, use that as a food source for them. A lot of our herbs, typically when we're growing herbs, we want to cut the flowers off because that reduces those essential oils, which gives us the flavors and the aromas and stuff. But I'm not a big herb person, so I don't really care if they flower. But like our mints and stuff, I let those flower. And then those are very attractive to various beneficial insects and stuff.
Yeah, if we're attracting our beneficial insects, we're attracting our pollinators. We're helping our amphibians. We're helping our other wildlife out there. So yeah, you're setting up good habitat in your yard. I like that. I like that approach.
Yeah, and if you've got a pollinator landscaping, you're already doing this. I mean, they'll go to that stuff. They'll act as pollinators as well potentially. So it's not necessarily an either or. You're doing both, and if you're incorporating flowers into your vegetable gardens or doing edible landscaping, you're already doing some of this already. But if we're doing this, we're trying to draw these in, then we got to be careful about our pesticide use, because pesticides are killing our pest insects are going to more than likely. A lot of them are also going to kill those beneficial insects as well.
Well, Ken, speaking of pesticides, we've covered 3 of the 4 pillars of IPM, and we have arrived at the pillar, we call chemicals, or maybe pesticides would be a better word for that, because as some people I talk to like to hammer in my head, they say, well, everything's chemicals. So I got you. I hear you folks. I understand. That's just the vernacular we use in the gardening world. But yes, the chemical use or the pesticide use, that last tool in our toolbox, or this final pillar of our structure here. The thing that I feel like people get confused by, I tried to do this. I tried to like retrain society to use the term pesticide correctly. Let me try one more time. A lot of times people, when they hear pesticide, they think something to kill bugs. They don't think of it as anything else. But the way we use the term pesticide is it's like an umbrella term that covers multiple different types of chemicals. So a pesticide being the umbrella term, we have all of these other names for these specific sprays that we use for things. So for instance, to kill our bugs or our insects, we would call them insecticides. And then to kill our plants, we would call them herbicides. To control some of our fungal diseases, we would call them fungicides. And then, of course, we have repellents, or we have things that kill mammals like rodents. We call those rodenticides. And all of these things fall within that umbrella of pesticides. I've tried explaining that many times before, and people just say, yes, but I need to kill, my, let's see, imported cabbage worm. What pesticide do I use? Okay, like you are using that term correctly, but also not. So it's insecticide. Am I being too picky? I'm probably being too picky.
No, I see. I don't use pesticides, but I use herbicides or something.
Yes.
Something like that.
Yes.
So basically, side is kill. And so pesticide would just be you're killing pests. And then we're breaking that down to insecticide is killing insects and so on and so forth.
Yes. So yes, we have a gamut of insecticides. Actually, the list that I mentioned, you have a list that's like so long, the font's so small you can't see all of the different sides that there truly are out there.
Yeah, I'm not even sure that's a comprehensive list. Mollucides and for killing snails and slugs, and ovicides of eggs, and so pesticides for fish, and
miticides for mites.
Yeah, you name it.
Bactericides.
There's a side for it.
We figured out how to kill it. And so, yeah, these are chemicals that we use to control stuff. So, but really the whole goal, the whole idea with the first three pillars of this IPM structure is that not all of it rests on this one chemical pillar. We're spreading the load out. We're trying to reduce maybe the chemical input into the environment, or to at least make it more targeted towards a particular part of their life cycle where they're most vulnerable to it, where we don't have to use higher concentrations or more volume of a particular chemical on whatever it is we're trying to control. That, though, just plays back into the foundation of the structure, the ecology, the biology, the taxonomy, all of that. It all works together. And we'll have pictures of this, right, Ken? Can we post pictures of this structure that you've created on the web for folks listening? Well, we're trying our best to explain, but you probably have all kinds of wacky things visualized in your head.
So you can do our crude PowerPoint
diagram. Shapes on top of each other. That's what we're going to do.
Yeah,
but you'll get the picture.
Yeah. And I think with chemicals, pesticides, however you want to classify it, I think a lot of times when people talk about IPM, it's used as a last resort. But I would personally I'd push back on that a little bit, because sometimes chemicals are going to be the best option for managing a particular pest. So, personally, I don't really like using a last resort, because sometimes it is going to be the best option, but you need to do it early. And if you try other things and it doesn't work, now you're out of luck. You think like something like squash bugs. If you try doing this, that, and the other to manage them, but you don't get them early enough, they become adults. Chemicals we can buy as homeowners don't really do a whole lot to those adults. So that's one of those, you're scouting, you see them, you're smashing the eggs, but you just see the nymphs everywhere. You're probably better off spraying than trying to hand smash or setting out boards that they can congregate under. You kind of get to that point where it's maybe you can do other stuff, but if you don't do it, now you're too late and you're in serious trouble, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So should we get into this, Ken? What about synthetic versus biorational or organic types of chemicals? Do you have any thoughts on that debate? How many comments would you like this week?
I'll be out of the office for the next few weeks. Yeah. So, we as humans, we like categorizing things. So pesticides, like anything else, we can categorize multiple ways. So how is it used, the target, what's it controlling, how is it made, synthetic, biorational, contact, systemic, how selective it is, all of that fun stuff. So, our synthetic or biorational, so synthetic is going to be man-made stuff. So it'd be our organophosphates, carbamates, pyrethroids, which is a synthetic version of a biorational pyrethrin. But it's more stable, works a little bit better than the natural, and we've improved upon it, so to speak. And biorational are coming from those natural materials. So microbial pesticides, something like a BT, would be a biorational. It's coming from a bacteria. Botanical, your plant extracts, horticultural soaps and oils are coming from natural materials. Is one better than the other? It just depends on what you're trying to control. In a lot of cases, I would say, some of our biorationals, like the microbials, the BT, those can be very selective. The BTK, the Christachii strain of, so BT is Bacillus thuringiensis, it's a bacteria. Christachii strain, you put that out for controlling caterpillars. They eat that, destroys the gut. Other insects eat it, it doesn't do anything to them. The BTI israeliensis that works on, it's in like mosquito dunks, works on aquatic fly larvae. Mosquitoes would be an example of that. Doesn't affect other types. So some of these can be fairly specific, so you're not having those non-target organisms being affected. But I don't know. I think we'll say pet peeve of mine for the natural. It's natural, so it's safe. That's not really the case. I mean, these are pesticides; they're intended to kill things. A lot of these are going to be less toxic than some of our synthetic types. But it doesn't mean we can be kind of cavalier about using them. You still need to wear the proper equipment, long pants, long sleeves, whatever that label says. But typically we're trying to cover as much of our bodies as we can, so we're not getting these chemicals on our bodies and exposing ourselves. There's some nicotine sulfate, rotenone. Those aren't available anymore, but those used to be pesticides that you could buy. Those are natural products, and those are much more toxic than some of these synthetic type insecticides. Nature is constantly trying to protect itself from being eaten or killed. So, I mean, the natural world's come up with some pretty toxic chemicals. So, just because it's natural doesn't necessarily mean it's safe.
Yeah. We can't operate in that black and white world of, blanket statements where organic equals safe. Yeah. I actually think I did an organic gardening class when I first started with Extension, which would have been in 2012. Back then, you could still buy rotenone, which that is, it's one of those very potent organic pesticides.
The LD50 on that's a lethal dose that kills 50% of the population. This is in milligrams per kilogram. So the lower the number, the more toxic it is. Rotenone, I think it was an LD50 of like 60. Mm-hmm. Whereas carbaryl, which is insecticide that was commonly recommended for like Japanese beetles, 7 would be an example. I don't think there's many 7 products, if any, that use it anymore. But that used to be the recommendation, 5-10 years ago. LD50 on that is 590. Yeah, so rotenone is 10 times more. Lethal dose is 10 times lower than something like carbaryl. But again, even when you can't get rotenone anymore, but that is still considered a natural product.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Botulism toxin.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's spray that on my tomatoes.
We're using that for Botox, but I mean that's natural. But you get too much of that, again,
make you sick.
You're done for.
Yeah. Ugh. Oh. Yes. I again say, doesn't matter what you use. Just develop a good IPM system. Develop a good foundation. Your pillars, all of that, and you probably won't need to be reaching as much for a lot of the pesticides.
Hopefully, yeah. But just want to try to move away from the spray and pray. Just because you see, and again, usually it's just with insects, just because you see an insect out there doesn't mean you need to grab a bottle of whatever and start spraying. Make sure it's actually something that's causing problems or will cause you problems. And again, in a lot of cases, there's other things we can do before we need to spray.
There are combinations too. So we're trying to battle a particular weed called Sericea lespedeza in a lot of our prairies. And so right now we are using fire, which promotes its growth, so that we can then time an herbicide application to then wipe it out. And it's kind of an experiment because we don't know what to do about this particular plant. It is a non-native invasive plant that a lot of biologists are pretty concerned about. It's taking over a lot of natural areas right now. I think it's going to make some of these other herbaceous ones like teasel and things seem like child's play compared to Sericea lespedeza. That is, I think it's in your neck of the woods, Ken, and it is creeping into the southern portion of the counties that I serve currently. Oh, it's here, but it's just barely here.
Yeah, I think there's a few years ago, went somewhere and somebody had some, if I remember right.
So use the tools in your toolbox. Build your foundation. Build your structure of IPM. Is that all we need to mention, Ken? Profit. Yeah. And then make all the money, or not money, if you're gardening at home. Look, but Ken, not even a lot of our own pesticides, we group them organic versus synthetic. We have many more categories within this world of science here of pesticides. So there's different types of chemicals that are available that they act in different ways, or they need, and because of this action, maybe they need to be applied in a certain way. So let's talk a little bit about that before we close out the show, and that, what are the different types of pesticides out there, considering like how they need to be applied. And is there anything that's left behind, which we call residual effect?
Yeah. So usually when our pesticides, again, categorizing different ways, but one way you can do is contact or systemic. So our contact pesticides, when we're using these, they have to come into contact with whatever target pest they're trying to control. So, if we're trying to, again, insects is that's what I always default to, but if we're trying to control an insect on a plant, we need to make sure we have good coverage, get as much of that plant protected as we possibly can, because if, we miss, or you're doing a shrub and you miss a whole branch, well, those insects can feed on that. They're not going to be exposed to that pesticide. It's not going to work on them. So having that good control so they can come into contact, or good coverage so they can come into contact with it and be exposed, take it up, get covered in it, however that's going to work to potentially kill them. With our contacts, that residual is going to be important. So the longer it sticks around, the more likely it is that pest is going to come into contact with it and we can control it. On the flip side, the longer it sticks around, the more likely non-target organisms or things that we don't want to kill are going to come into contact with it. So it's a little bit of a balancing act there. We want to stick around long enough that's going to protect that plant from new pests coming in, we don't want to stick around so long that it's going to start, it's going to be there for months, and then our non-target stuff is going to start coming into contact with it. So there's a bit of a balancing act there. What the right answer is, that's up to the individual to decide, how they're going to balance that out. I would say a lot of the stuff we're using as homeowners, there's some residual, but they're not sticking around terribly long usually. With our systemic insecticides, we're applying this to the plant or to the soil. Plants are taking that up and they're moving that that pesticide throughout the plant. So again, if we're doing emerald ash borer control would be an example. We're doing this like imidacloprid, do that as a soil drench. Plant roots will take that up, move that throughout the plant. Glyphosate is a systemic herbicide, so that it's applied to the leaves of the plant. That herbicide is then moved down to the roots of the plant, and it's killed. So these chemicals are moving within the plant to either protect it or kill it. Typically, these are going to take longer to work just because they have to move throughout the plant in order to do whatever they're going to do. A lot of times they will last longer because they're not exposed to UV light to the same extent as something that's on the surface of the leaf. So it's not being broken down as quickly. And then, how much it moves in the plant is going to vary on the chemical. Some of them will move long distances, something like imidacloprid. Others may only move a few inches, few centimeters. It's basically from the leaf surface down into the leaf. So it'll vary depending on the chemical, how much movement within the plant you're going to get.
And there's a lot of information that a person using these chemicals can glean by reading the label. That is your resource. That is your information. That's why we always say, read the label if you're going to use any type of pesticide. That label is technically the law, right, Ken? Like, it's a legal document.
Yep. Yeah, basically, you buy that and you're agreeing that you're going to follow the directions. They'll tell you how much to put on, how often you can do it, what plants you can put it on, what you can expect it to control, what you need to wear when you're putting it on, how long you need to wait before you go back into those plants, how long you have to wait before you can harvest. Get it on you, what are you supposed to do to pose risks to other organisms. So there's all kinds of information that I would say that, well, I don't think it'd be controversial to say. I think most people probably don't read the label. They just look to see how much do I need to put on, and that's the end of that. But maybe not have to. I would say the first time you use it, read that thing cover to cover, know what you're doing. Ideally, you do that every time, but at least once. Read through it, know what you're supposed to be doing.
Well, we got into a lot of issues with it last year because that is when the company Roundup changed their active ingredients. They took glyphosate out, at least for the residential market, and they put like 3 different types of active ingredients in there. One of those had a residual effect on woody plants that glyphosate didn't have. And so if you were spraying Roundup with these 3 new active ingredients on a particular area, you now had to wait 30 days before planting any type of woody plant material in that area. And that was true with the product before. And I think a lot of people got burned on that because they just missed that part of the label. Yeah, like you said, Ken, they were looking for how much do I apply? They got that, but they missed that part of like, here's what other things can be damaged, and here are the residuals of these new chemicals that we put into here.
Yeah, because before it'd only be a couple of days.
Yeah.
And another thing to be a point out, labels do change. So, you may be used to, I always get this product. This is how I do it. Well, it changed on you. Mm-hmm. And you got yeah.
So we talked about bees last week, Ken. Real quick, how do we spray things to protect bees?
Well, don't spray would be one. But if you need to spray,
step 1, don't spray.
And if you need to spray, you can take off the flowers of the plants, remove those flowers so the bees aren't going to be visiting. Try doing that, at dusk or dawn. I would say more. If I had to pick dusk or dawn, I would do dusk. That just gives you that much more time for that pesticide to dry out. If you're doing it at dawn, you've only got a short time before the bees are coming back out. Mm-hmm. But doing a dusk, your moths and stuff are may get hits. So that's not a perfect solution for that. Um, as far as selectivity, there's some pesticides that are going to be less toxic than others to bees, but all of them. So most of them are still going to have some sort of toxicity to them. Purdue University had, I'm assuming it's still available. They have a document. We'll have to try to find it. We can put a link in the show notes on that gives the toxicity of different pesticides to honeybees. So honeybees is what all the research is done on because we can keep them in hives and they're easy to manage that way. Whereas native bees, it's a little more difficult. But at least honeybees, you've got an idea of what is going to be toxic to them or more toxic than other things. So looking at the less toxic stuff, it's still potentially going to affect them. I think more and more research is finding that even low doses, sublethal doses are still having negative effects on honeybees, bumblebees, other types of bees as well. And it's not just insecticides, fungicides is going to mess with the gut flora as well. So be careful with fungicides as well. And looking at less toxic stuff, changing the time of day, or removing flowers if possible, so they're not visiting those plants while they're being sprayed or after they've been sprayed.
And folks, we usually do get some hate when we talk about using pesticides on the show. Just want to make sure to know that what Illinois Extension does is that we deliver kind of an unbiased look at things. We want to give you information so that you can make a decision about what to do in your yard. We are not here trying to tell you what to do. So you feel free if you want to make any comments, you're more than welcome to, but just know that, we're not trying to steer anyone in any direction. Providing you information for you to make your own choices.
Yes. And we'll keep talking about pesticides until they are banned, which I don't think is coming.
Probably not coming. Banned or not needed. Yeah. Well, one of those things. Yeah. So one of those two things. Well, that was a lot of great information about pesticides and how they fit into an overall IPM structure, Integrated Pest Management, not the start to a junior high joke. Well, the Good Growing Podcast is a production of University of Illinois Extension, edited this week by me, Chris Enroth. A special thank you, Ken. Thank you so much. You know what? You sound like you might have studied this at one point in time in your schooling. This must have been a big part of that old PhD thing you got at old Florida.
No PhD. DP.
Oh, what? I'm going to call it. I'm labeling Ken as a doctor here. I'm going to get it one of these days.
Coming after me.
I don't want that kind of pressure.
Yes. Spend many hours in classes learning about it. So, yes, hopefully everybody will at least consider it now, if not outright do it. So, go out there and start scouting, see what's out there. Get a handle on it sooner rather than later. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And let's do this again next week.
Oh, we shall do this again next week. The horticultural hijinks shall continue on the Good Growing Podcast as we get through the month of April. Oh my gosh, Ken, we're halfway through. It's tax day as we record right now. So, I mean, it's going to be harvest time any day now, right? Tomatoes coming out yet? No, not yet.
We're getting close.
We are getting close. Oh yeah, it's gonna be a short spring. It feels like so. Getting plants set out already. So, well, listeners, thank you for doing what you do best, and that is listening. Or if you're watching us on YouTube, watching. And as always, keep on growing. All set.
All set. Yeah, my stretch is done.
All right. Yep. Yeah. Aluminum linoleum.